March 21, 1963. 6 in the morning, and the island is quiet in the particular way it's always quiet right before a shift change. Foghorns out past the Golden Gate, gulls working the tide line below the cell house, the smell of cold salt air coming in through a warden's open window. Olin Blackwell is already dressed. He didn't sleep much. Down the hill, in the mess hall, 27 men are eating breakfast off a menu that will still be chalked on that board decades from now, preserved exactly as it was that morning. Scrambled eggs, stewed fruit, toast, milk, the same routine that's run on the same schedule for 29 years. None of those 27 men know they're eating the last meal the federal government will ever serve inside Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. Blackwell knows. He's known for months. And by the end of today, he stops being the warden of the most feared prison in America and becomes something else entirely. The last official witness standing on an island that is about to stop being a penitentiary forever. By mid-morning, boats start arriving at the dock, and they aren't prison transports. They're press boats. Reporters climbing off with notepads already open. Photographers checking light meters against the fog. Newsreel crews hauling equipment up the same ramp that's carried 30 years of federal inmates in the opposite direction. Assistant Director of the Federal Bureau of Prisons Fred Wilkinson personally leads members of the press underneath the cell block to show them the building's condition with their own eyes. Corroded support beams, catwalks rusted thin enough to flex under a man's weight, concrete eaten through after 5 decades of salt air working at everything the ocean could reach. Officer Jim Lowry stands at the head of Broadway, the cell block's main corridor, with reporters already lined up on either side, waiting. Down that same corridor, in a few hours, 27 men in chains will make the last walk anyone will ever make as an Alcatraz inmate. This isn't a leak to a sympathetic journalist. This isn't a document slipped under a door in the middle of the night. The federal government invited every camera in San Francisco to come and watch its most famous prison die. And that's exactly where this story stops behaving the way these stories are supposed to behave. When a federal institution admits its flagship operation has failed, the instinct, almost without exception, is to bury it. Reassign the staff quietly. Move the files without a press release. Let the story die somewhere in a records office in Washington where nobody will ever go looking for it. That is not what happened on the Rock. The Justice Department did the precise opposite of hiding. They opened every door available to them and pointed the cameras straight into the wreckage underneath their own prison. This is not a story about something the government hid from you. This is a story about something the government wanted you to watch in close detail on the public record, cameras rolling, reporters walking the same corridors the inmates walked. And the real question sitting underneath all of it isn't what they were covering up. It's why a federal agency, at the exact moment of its most public failure, chose to broadcast that failure instead of quietly closing the door behind it. If the idea of a government choosing to be watched instead of watching in silence sounds backwards to you, it should. Almost everything we cover in this kind of investigation is about the moment an institution tries to make something disappear. Subscribe now because this is the rarer case, the one where the disappearing act ran in the opposite direction, and that reversal is exactly why it earns the next 15 minutes of your attention. Alcatraz had been a military fortification since the 1850s, a U.S. Army disciplinary barracks by the early 1900s, and from 1934 onward, the flagship federal penitentiary of the United States, purpose-built to hold the men no ordinary prison system could contain. James A. Johnston was its first warden, running the island under a code of near-total silence, minimal privileges, and enforced isolation. Paul Madigan followed him, inheriting a prison already showing its age by the late 1950s. Olin Blackwell, who had served as Madigan's associate warden since 1959, took over the top post in 1961, stepping into an institution already sliding toward its own end, both financially and structurally, before he'd unpacked his office. For nearly 3 decades, the entire premise of Alcatraz rested on a single claim: escape-proof. Cold water, brutal currents, Total isolation from the mainland. Nobody gets off the rock. That myth was the whole product. It's what justified the cost, the isolation, the reputation. And it held right up until the myth started cracking from the inside, long before the government ever admitted it publicly. Over Alcatraz's 29 years as a federal penitentiary, 36 men attempted to escape across 14 separate attempts. Most were recaptured within hours. Several were shot. A few drowned. Only a small handful were never accounted for at all, and the U.S. Marshal Service still lists active warrants for the ones who vanished into the bay and were never seen again, dead or alive. The most famous of those vanishings came in June of 1962. Frank Morris and the two Anglin brothers used papier-mâché dummy heads to fool the night guards, worked through ventilation shafts they'd carved out over months using spoons and scrap metal, and slipped into the water under cover of darkness. They were never recovered. Blackwell himself was on vacation at Lake Berryessa when it happened, and even he privately doubted the men could have survived the crossing. That escape didn't create the closure. It accelerated something that had already been building for years. As early as 1959, internal federal reports had begun flagging Alcatraz's physical deterioration as a long-term liability, not just an embarrassment. By August of 1962, Bureau of Prisons Director James Bennett formalized it, issuing an official statement to the press, backed by a full engineering study concluding the prison structures had deteriorated to a point where they risked becoming unsafe for staff and inmates alike. Catwalks were failing under normal weight loads. The electrical system was flagged as one incident away from catastrophic failure. Fixing it properly would have cost the federal government roughly $5 million, for a facility that already ran at nearly 3 times the daily cost per prisoner of an ordinary federal penitentiary. By late August 1962, transfer orders were already moving inmates out in chains, 6 at a time, toward Leavenworth, McNeil Island, Lewisburg, and Atlanta. By December, a gun smuggler named Frank Weatherman arrived on the island, assigned the very last inmate number Alcatraz would ever issue. With absolutely no way of knowing, he'd become the answer to the last piece of trivia the prison would ever generate. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy toured the island in person, surrounded by roughly 50 bodyguards, deliberately keeping his distance from the very men he'd come to see. At the same time, plans were already underway 2 states east, in Marion, Illinois, for a new federal penitentiary built specifically to inherit Alcatraz's role. A facility close to the center of the federal prison network instead of stranded in the middle of a bay, designed for inmates the system considered too dangerous for ordinary confinement. 6 incidents. 1 institution. All of them converging on the same March morning. Guard Jim Albright lived through nearly all of it, present for the 1962 escape, present for Kennedy's tour, and still on duty the morning the prison closed for good. Decades later, when historians finally sat him down to reconstruct that period in detail, Albright still remembered the sheer number of bodyguards surrounding Kennedy, keeping every inmate at arm's length during the visit. He remembered the names and inmate numbers of men who'd been gone for 60 years: Whitey Bulger, Alvin Creepy Karpus, the 26 years Karpus served, longer than any other man on the island. Albright wasn't an investigator or a journalist. He was staff on the inside, watching the machinery of a federal closure operate in real time, and later becoming one of the only people willing to describe in plain detail exactly how deliberate that final morning had been. Line these pieces up and a pattern appears that has nothing to do with secrecy. The engineering report was public. The cost estimate was public. Kennedy's tour was staged for photographs. The final walk down Broadway was scheduled specifically so the press could witness it. Even the transport boat carrying the last 27 inmates away had a name painted on its bow for the cameras: the Warden Blackwell. None of it was accidental. This was a closure engineered from the start to be watched, documented, and remembered on the government's own terms. Not stumbled into, not leaked, but built as a public event with a fixed date and an invited audience. The simplest explanation is that this was just bureaucracy doing what bureaucracy always does. An aging building, a repair bill nobody wanted to approve, closed the same unremarkable way any government facility eventually gets closed. And the financial case is real. The $5 million repair estimate is the official, documented reason on record, backed by an actual engineering study, not a cover story invented after the fact. But routine maintenance decisions don't usually come with an assistant director personally walking journalists beneath a cell block to photograph corroded steel for newsreel cameras. They don't usually come with an attorney general touring a prison yard behind 50 bodyguards specifically so photographers can capture it. A cost-cutting memo doesn't need an audience. This one was handed one anyway, deliberately on a fixed date with reporters lined up in advance. None of this was unique to Alcatraz, and that's what makes it worth widening the lens. The Justice Department of the early 1960s, still absorbing the public embarrassment of the escape-proof prison's most infamous breakout less than a year earlier, was learning something federal agencies still practice today. Sometimes the fastest way to end a damaging story isn't to conceal the failure. It's to stage its funeral in front of enough cameras that nobody can later claim anything was hidden from them. Visibility, used correctly, can be just as effective a management tool as secrecy. Sometimes more effective, because it closes off the accusation before anyone has the chance to make it. 3 separate reasons line up for why the government chose visibility over silence on that particular morning, instead of the quiet transfer they could easily have arranged instead. First, institutional. After the 1962 escape publicly humiliated the Bureau of Prisons, letting reporters photograph the physical decay underneath the cell block reframed the entire narrative for the agency. Alcatraz wasn't failing because its staff or its methods were flawed. It was failing because the concrete and the steel underneath it were failing. The blame shifted, cleanly and permanently, from the people who ran the prison to the building itself. Second, political. Robert Kennedy's Justice Department was under sustained national scrutiny over prison conditions throughout this period, from multiple facilities, not just Alcatraz. A visible, photographed closure let the administration present the decision as forward-looking and humane, retiring a brutal, outdated relic of an older penal philosophy, rather than quietly admitting defeat in the aftermath of an embarrassing breakout that had made international news. Third, financial. Placing the $5 million repair estimate and the underlying engineering study directly into the public record, backed by Bennett's own statement to the press, preempted any future accusation that the closure had been political retaliation rather than a fiscally responsible decision made on paper, in the open, available for anyone in Congress or the press to check against the numbers. Alcatraz Island now sits under the National Park Service, part of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, drawing well over 1 million visitors every year, most of them walking the exact stretch of Broadway that 27 chained men walked for the last time on that March morning in 1963. The engineering reports, Bennett's 1962 statement, and the federal transfer orders documenting the entire closure all remain part of the accessible public record today, archived and available to anyone who wants to read them. Nothing about the official case was ever sealed. The single piece of film from that specific morning that isn't sitting in a public archive anywhere is a home movie shot from a staff balcony above the dock. Developed once, decades ago, by a private lab and never returned to the family that filmed it. When a reporter asked Frank Weatherman, standing in chains on the dock that morning, how it felt to be the very last man off the rock, he didn't reach for anything dramatic. He smiled thin, according to the Wire report filed that same day, and said it plain, "Good. Good for me. Good for everyone. Alcatraz never was no good." 29 years of federal history, the most feared address in the American prison system, ended with one exhausted, honest sentence from the last man to walk out of it. You've been trained to look for the cover-up, the sealed file, the witness who waited 40 years before he finally talked. But sometimes the truth was never buried at all. Sometimes it was staged, lit, and placed directly in front of every camera in San Francisco, and it still manages to hide from you simply because nobody expects an institution to be honest on purpose. Alcatraz didn't die in the dark. It died on schedule, in daylight, in front of reporters, aboard a boat carrying its own warden's name toward the mainland. The building is gone now. The performance behind its ending is still working exactly as intended, on you right now, more than 60 years later. If you've made it this far, you already know what we look for in this channel, the moments history doesn't want remembered the way they actually happened. Sometimes that means digging up what was buried. Sometimes, like today, it means looking directly at what was never hidden at all and asking the harder question underneath it. Why? Subscribe, because the next investigation is already in production.